The entrance gaped, a jagged wound in the earth. Blackness bled outwards, swallowing the afternoon sun. Air, stale and cold, seeped from the mine. It carried a silence, heavy and expectant, like a held breath. This was no ordinary mine, this was the gullet of greed. Men had ripped at the earth here, hungry for gold. They found their prize and their doom. The air tasted of it, greed, regret, and something colder, older. The mountain breathed, a slow, watchful inhale, waiting. Vikram adjusted his headlamp, a young man, ambition burning bright in his eyes. He wasn't afraid, not yet. The mine held the key to his future, his doctorate research, proof of a rare gold vein formation, fame, recognition. He checked his equipment, hammer, chisel, sample bags, a compass, its needle twitching erratically. Local legends whispered of magnetic anomalies within the mine. Nonsense, Vikram thought, or was it? He took a deep breath, the metallic tang of the air catching in his throat one last look at the sun-drenched world outside. Then he stepped into the darkness. The air grew colder, damper. The silence deepened, pressing against Vikram's eardrums. He walked along the narrow-gauge railway track, relics of a bygone era. This mine, the locals called it boot coal, ghost mine. A century ago, a massacre. Miners on strike, demanding fair wages, gunned down by the British overseer, their bodies left to rot in the very earth they'd bled for. Vikram had dismissed it as folklore. Now the silence felt different, thick, heavy with unspoken words, unfinished business. He shivered. Just the cold, he told himself, just the cold. Deeper he went, the weight of the earth pressing down on him. Each step echoed in the silence, a reminder of the isolation that surrounded him. The walls of the tunnel seemed to close in, the darkness becoming almost tangible, like a living entity that sought to swallow him whole. The air grew thick, difficult to breathe. It was as if the very atmosphere was conspiring against him, each breath a laborious task. The fog that hung in the air was dense, almost suffocating, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The darkness ahead seemed to pulse, a rhythmic beat that matched his own racing heart. It was as if the tunnel itself was alive, breathing in sync with him, drawing him deeper into its depths. A low hum resonated through the tunnels, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a haunting melody, one that sent shivers down his spine and made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Machinery, long silent, whispering its lament. The rusted gears and broken chains seemed to tell a story of abandonment and decay, a once thriving operation now left to rot in the bowels of the earth. Or was it something else? A presence that lurked just beyond the edge of his vision, always there but never fully seen. It was a feeling that gnawed at him, a sense of being watched, of not being alone in the darkness. The compass spun wildly, the needle dancing a frantic jig. It was as if the very laws of nature were being twisted and bent, the magnetic fields distorted by some unseen force. Vikram's heart pounded in his chest, each beat a drum that echoed in the silence. Fear gripped him, a cold, unrelenting terror that made his hands shake and his breath come in short, ragged gasps. A cold sweat prickled his skin, the droplets of moisture a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the tunnel. He wiped his brow with a trembling hand, trying to steady himself, to push back the rising tide of panic. He stopped, shining his headlamp around. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but the rough, uneven walls of the tunnel. There was no sign of life, no indication of what lay ahead. Nothing, just the endless black void. It was a void that seemed to stretch on forever, an abyss that threatened to swallow him whole. The silence was deafening, a stark reminder of his isolation, and yet the humming grew louder. It was a sound that seemed to come from the very heart of the earth, a deep, resonant vibration that filled the tunnel and made the ground beneath his feet tremble. A sense of dread coiled in his gut. He was not alone. The feeling was unmistakable, a primal instinct that told him he was being watched, that something was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. A whisper carried on the stale air. It was a sound that sent chills down his spine, a voice that seemed to come from the very walls of the tunnel, echoing in the darkness. A name or a sob? He couldn't be sure. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a haunting reminder that he was not alone in the darkness. Vikram's hand trembled. He fumbled for his hammer, gripping it like a lifeline. His rational mind screamed at him. It was just the wind, the creaking of the mine, but deep down a primal fear took root. The darkness was alive, watching. He was an intruder in a sacred space, a place of sorrow and rage, a place where the dead refused to die. He wanted to run, to flee back to the sunlight, but his feet felt rooted to the spot. He was frozen, caught in the icy grip of terror. Then he saw them, flickering shadows at the edge of his headlamp's beam. They seemed to dance and waver as if mocking his presence. The darkness was alive, pulsating with an eerie energy that sent chills down his spine. He took a hesitant step forward, his breath echoing in the confined space of the cave. Men hunched and broken, their eyes burning with a cold fire. These were not just shadows. They were the remnants of souls long lost. Their faces told stories of suffering and endless toil, their bodies bearing the marks of a life spent in darkness. Each step he took seemed to bring him closer to their world, a world of pain and despair. The air grew frigid, heavy with despair. They reached for him, their voices a chorus of whispers and moans. The sound was almost unbearable, a symphony of sorrow that echoed through the cavern. He could feel their cold breath on his skin, their presence pressing down on him like a weight. It was as if the cave itself was alive, feeding off his fear. He saw their faces, twisted in agony, their skin caked with dust and blood. Each face was a portrait of torment, eyes wide with a terror that seemed to reach out and grab him. He could almost hear their silent screams, feel their pain as if it were his own. The sight was overwhelming, a nightmare come to life. The British overseer, his face contorted in a silent scream, a pickaxe buried in his chest. The overseer's ghost was a stark reminder of the brutal history of the mine, a symbol of the suffering inflicted upon the miners. His eyes, wide with shock and pain, seemed to follow Vikram, accusing him, pleading with him. The miners, their eyes pleading, their hands outstretched. They seemed to be reaching out for salvation, for someone to release them from their eternal torment. Vikram felt a pang of guilt, a sense of helplessness. He wanted to help them, to ease their suffering, but he was just as trapped as they were. Vikram stumbled back, his heart a frantic drum in his chest. Panic surged through him, his mind racing with thoughts of escape. But the cave seemed to close in around him, the shadows growing darker, more oppressive. He could feel his sanity slipping away, the line between reality and nightmare blurring. This was no hallucination. This was real. The ghosts of the past had come to claim him, to drag him into their world of endless night. He could feel their cold fingers brushing against his skin, their whispers filling his mind. There was no escape, no way out. He was trapped in the shadows of the dead. The ghosts of the Boot Col had come for him. They were relentless, their presence a constant reminder of the mine's dark history. Vikram knew he had to find a way to survive, to escape their grasp. But as the shadows closed in, he realized that survival might be impossible. The dead had claimed this place, and they were not willing to let him go. Panic seized him. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum, each beat echoing in the suffocating darkness. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and foreboding. He turned and ran, his headlamp bouncing wildly, casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed on the tunnel walls. Each shadow seemed to reach out, clawing at him, trying to pull him back into the abyss. The whispers followed, gaining on him. They were unintelligible, yet filled with a malevolent intent that chilled him to the bone. It was as if the very walls of the mine were alive, conspiring against him. He didn't dare look back. The fear of what he might see was too great. His only thought was to keep moving, to put as much distance as possible between himself and the unseen horrors behind him. He could feel their icy breath on his neck. It was a sensation that sent shivers down his spine, making his skin crawl. The cold seemed to seep into his very soul, freezing him from the inside out. The tunnel stretched ahead, an endless nightmare. It was a labyrinth of darkness with no end in sight. Every step he took seemed to lead him deeper into the bowels of the earth, further away from the light and safety. His foot caught on the rail track and he fell. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and for a moment he lay there, gasping for breath, the cold, hard ground pressing against his body. He scrambled to his feet, his hand scraping against something cold and sharp. Pain shot through his hand, but he ignored it, driven by the primal urge to survive. A pickaxe lay on the ground, its metal slick with moisture. Or was it blood? The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through him, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it. He didn't wait to find out. He pushed himself up and started running again, his movements fueled by sheer desperation. The whispers were closer now, almost upon him. He ran, his lungs burning, his legs screaming for respite. Every muscle in his body ached, but he couldn't stop. Stopping meant death, or worse. He had to escape this subterranean hell. The thought of freedom, of the open air and the light of day was the only thing that kept him going. He had to survive. He had to make it out alive. The darkness seemed to press in on him, suffocating him. The whispers became screams echoing through the tunnels. But amidst the terror, a new sound reached him, a distant glimmer of light. Hope surged through him. He stumbled towards it, his legs heavy, his body racked with exhaustion. He burst out of the mine entrance, falling to his knees on the blessedly solid ground. He gasped for air, the sunlight stinging his eyes. He was free, but the mine remembered. He could feel its gaze on his back, cold and unforgiving. Vikram never returned to the mine. The experience left him shaken, haunted by the ghosts of the boot call. He abandoned his research. His dreams of fame and recognition turned to dust. He carried the memory of that day, a chilling reminder of the price of greed. The mine stood silent, a testament to human suffering, a tomb for forgotten souls, a place where the darkness whispered and the dead refused to be silenced.